Okay, so good morning, all. Another edition of Torah study. The portion this week is Shemini, and the portion begins on page 630. But what I wanted to focus on, and I'll say the bracha in a moment, is chapter 11, the sixth aliyah, which begins on page 636. In the Eitz Chaim, whatever edition of Chumash you're using, you're looking for the 11th chapter of Leviticus. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So before I get into chapter 11, though, and I want to just look at something at the end of chapter 10. So the bulk of the portion, so chapter 11, it says right next to it, that's where the sixth aliyah begins. The bulk of the portion, the first five aliyot, is really about the infamous incident of two of Aaron's sons being consumed by fire that comes from heaven for bringing a strange offering. And we've talked about that in years past, and I didn't want to talk about it again, but what I wanted to just point out from the end of chapter 10 is a phrase that's where it says in verse 20, the last sentence of chapter 10, Vayishma Moshe Vayitav Be'enav. And Moses heard, and it was good in his eyes. What I wanted to say about that is that throughout the process after Nadav and Avihu, those are the two sons who were killed by God in front of the congregation, the rest of the story is about how the service proceeded despite this horrific event taking place. And Moses is telling Aaron what he still needs to do. Moses is telling their uncle and cousins what to do, how to take care of Nadav and Avihu. And Moses is also telling Aaron, this is what you need to keep on doing. And then at the end of chapter 10, Moses expresses surprise that Aaron hasn't done what he was supposed to do. And so in verse 19, Aaron says, Vayidaber Aharon el Moshe, Hein hayom hikrivu et chatatam v'et olatam lifnei Adonai, vatikrena oti ka'ele, va'achalti chatat hayom hayitav be'enei Adonai. So Aaron says to Moses, yes, this day they brought their sin offerings and their burnt offerings before God. And you called, should I have been called like these? And should I have eaten the sin offering today? Would that have been good in the eyes of God? In other words, and I didn't want to spend too much time on all the details of this, except for Aaron's question of Moses. You wanted me to do all these things. I wasn't sure I should do this because I don't think it would be good in the eyes of God. My two sons, out of four sons, two of my four sons were just burnt up in front of my eyes by God. Should I just have kept on going? And so I bring this up for an interesting lesson, because the weekly email that I get of Devar Torah from Hadar, written this year by Rabbi Tali Adler, focuses on this idea. This is the only time in the book of Leviticus where the concept of good comes into play. We're presented with lots of laws of sacrifices. We will be presented next week with laws of impurity, things that flow from the body and the skin rashes and things like that. Lots of laws like that. Nothing related to the idea of good. Like we're doing this because this is good in the eyes of God to do. So the idea that there should be something to think about behind the offerings that are supposed to be brought is an interesting concept that Aaron brings into play here. And Moses responds also by saying Moses heard and it was good in his eyes. That it was good that Aaron responded in this way and that he paused and thought about what he was about to do or what was he commanded to do and whether it was good or not to do that. So I think it's just interesting in the whole story that there's that element of thinking about what would be best and the opportunity for a human being to be thinking about what's best in relationship to God's laws. So it's just an interesting concept. And so the story ends in that way, and then the book of Leviticus continues with God telling Moses and Aaron the laws of keeping kosher. And so it just makes for it's an odd transition. We have what is essentially the only narrative section in the book of Leviticus is the beginning of the portion Shemini until this point. So the beginning of the little bit of chapter 9 and chapter 10, that's really the only narrative section of the book of Leviticus, and the narrative section ends and continues then with more laws. So we have all this, a variety of sacrifices that we're commanded to bring. We're told about the consecration ceremony of the priests. We're told then of this narrative, this story of Nadav and Avihu. And now that story's over, we're back to presentation of more laws. I don't have much to say about that, except that I think we can't help but notice the difference in style. And if you were asked what is the style of Leviticus, the answer would be overall it's laws being presented. But when you have this little bit of narrative thrown in, it's pretty stark, the difference in style. So we don't know, so what I mean by that is that you have this narrative and you think that it's presented at a particular time and place, whereas law can be presented at any time and place. We're not told, in this case, it was in the second month after leaving Egypt, or it's the second month in the second year, or something like that. We have that in the book of Numbers. We're told that. We're told at the end of the book of Leviticus that all these laws were given at Mount Sinai, but there's no time and place given here to these laws. So this chapter 11, could have happened chronologically way before chapter 9 and chapter 10. Or it could have happened way after chapter 9 and chapter 10. The way it's presented here, it seems like it happens right away, because it's chapter 10, verse 20 ends. Moses heard what Aaron said, and it was good in his eyes. And then you think chapter 11, the very next moment, God's talking to both Moses and Aaron and giving these laws. Well, is Aaron in the mood to hear these laws? Like, is he in the right mindset after mourning the tragic death of his sons to hear these laws? I don't know. But that's what we should be thinking about as chapter 11 begins. Okay, so we're on page 636. Chapter 11 of Leviticus. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe el Haaron lemor alehem. God spoke to Moses and Aaron, speaking to them. Now, the addition of Alehem, usually the verse in the Torah doesn't include the Alehem. Usually a verse would be Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, or Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon lemor. The Alehem doesn't usually follow, but because it's implied, because it just said God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them. Okay, so it's extraneous words, and I'm not sure why the Alehem is added to the verse, and our commentary doesn't even comment on that extra word. There's no comment here to verse 1. Okay, but I'm just pointing it out in the translation that it's just extra. 2. Dabru el bnei Yisrael lemor, zot hachaya asher tochlu mikol habehema asher al haaretz. Speak to the people of Israel, saying, this is the animal, which is unusual in the singular, because the Hebrew is written in the singular. This is the animal, but the list, what that follows, means these are the animals. Okay, so so it's just a Hebrew biblical style to put it in the singular here. So the English translation says these are the creatures. So if we're just reading the English, we wouldn't know that there's some issue with the Hebrew. That's why I read the Hebrew, just for us to understand where the translation's coming from. So the translation understands the singular Hebrew, this is the animal. Understanding it means these are the animals, or these are the creatures. Okay, so these are the creatures that you can eat from among all the land animals on the land. So from among all the mammals on the land. So behema, how do you translate behema? Is behema, sometimes behema is cattle, sometimes it's animal. You just have to understand it from the context. These are the animals that you can eat from the mammals that are on the earth. I think that's the best way to translate it. Verse 3, Kol mafreset parsa v'shosaat shesa parasot ma'alat gera babehema ota tochelu. Now, we know how to translate this, but I will just say we've never seen these words before in the Torah. And we don't see them again until the book of Deuteronomy, when the chapter in Deuteronomy repeats this list. But outside of those two places, we don't really see these words again. So we have to understand from context and from other times in which the roots of these words are used to understand what it's referring to. So all animals, not any animal, all animals that have true hooves, that with clefts in the hooves, so that is split hooves, and that chew the cud, from these mammals you can eat. Okay, so mammals that have split hooves and chew their cud, you can eat. Ach et ze lo tochlu mima'alei hagera umimafrisei haparsa et hagamal ki ma'alei gerahu ufarsa einena mafris tamehu lachem. So, but these do not eat from those that chew their cud and from the split hooves. That the camel, it chews its cud, but its hoof isn't cleft. It is impure to you. Ve'et hashafan ki ma'alei gerahu ufarsa lo yafris tamehu lachem. And now it says the daemon, the commentary on 638, a small mammal, the Syrian hyrax. It does not actually chew its cud, but gives that impression because of the protrusions in the stomach, which suggests that its stomach might have compartments, as is characteristic of the ruminants. Now, I would have translated shafan as a rabbit, and that's usually, if you the Hebrew word for rabbit is shafan, but our English translation decides to go with a specific animal like the rabbit called a hyrax that lives in the Middle East. Okay, so our bunny rabbits that we see around here don't live in the Middle East, but the word for bunny rabbit is shafan. Okay, so the rabbit, the daemon, the hyrax, you can't eat it. It chews its cud, but it doesn't have a split hoof. It is impure for you. Ve'et ha'arnevet ki ma'alat gerahi ufarsa lo hifrisa tameahi lachem. And the hare, okay, so I'm not an animal. I'm not a zoologist. I don't know the difference between a rabbit and a hare, okay? But the hare, because it chews its cud, but its hoof isn't cleft, is impure for you. V'eta chazir ki mafris parsahu v'shosa shesa parsa v'hu gera lo yigar tamehu lachem. And the pig, it says the swine, so I guess that's the more generic. It's not just the farm animal, the pig, but it could be the boar or any other kind of, pig, boar related animal. But for our purposes, because we eat it, well, in our area, right? If you go up 108 heading into Howard County, there's that famous general store at the corner with 216 that sells a whole variety of meat that you can't get anyplace else. And it sells boar meat. There's always a huge sign that says fresh boar meat here. And so there's other stuff like that. So more commonly, pork that you buy in the supermarket is from the farm animal, the pig. So I'm just going to translate it as the pig, that it has a completely split hoof, but it does not chew its cud. It is impure for you. 8, mi b'saram lo tochelu, uveniv latam lo tiga'u, tameim heim lachem. You cannot eat their flesh, and when it's a dead animal, as a carcass, you cannot touch. They are impure for you. So before we go on to more lists, next is fish, then it's birds, I just want to point out a couple things, and we'll read the below the line commentary on 637 in a moment. This list, first of all, there are a lot of people who try to explain these lists, based on the health of that is, whether it's healthy or not to eat these particular animals, and that perhaps the list represents healthy and unhealthy animals. So I will say that that's not the case for two reasons. One is there's nothing about a camel or a pig or a rabbit that is safe or not safe to eat health-wise, right? There are lots of people who eat rabbits and pigs who are extremely healthy. And in fact, there used to be a commercial for pork a number of years ago called the other white meat, right? So chicken is healthy. So pork, the pork industry paid for those commercials to point out that that's just as healthy as chicken too. So it's not about It's not about the health of the animal, and also because we're not given a reason. God does not give a reason for choosing these categories or making these categories for that tell us which animals, fish, and birds can be consumed and cannot be consumed. It seems arbitrary, and we don't know why it's arbitrary in this way. Okay? So, whatever explanation we want to come up with is made up. So this law is in the category of chok. There are a number of ways of categorizing the laws in the Torah. One is as chok and mishpat. So mishpat is a law that makes sense. Do not steal is a law in the Torah. It's one of the 10 commandments. That's given as a law from God to Moses at Mount Sinai, but it makes sense not to steal. You can understand why that would be given as a law. This, why animals to be consumed have to have completely split hooves and have to chew their cud, it doesn't make sense. You could have a different category. You can have mammals that gestate for under a year or can be eaten, and those who gestate for over a year cannot be eaten. You can say those mammals that I don't know that you can work in the field cannot be eaten because you work these animals. Why would you want to eat those animals? And maybe we want to eat animals that are that we don't work and that are not part of the farm. There could be a whole variety of ways of categorizing animals that could theoretically make sense. But the point here is that it's not about making sense. It's about following this law because God said so. And those laws, the laws in which they're given because God said so and they have no reason, those are in some ways the hardest laws to follow because it represents an idea that we're giving ourselves over to a higher power, right? It's one thing to be a moral and ethical person and say, oh, I'll follow the tenets of Judaism too, because it's moral and ethical to follow them. There's nothing moral and ethical about this list of animals that can be consumed or not. They're arbitrary. They are amoral and aethical, right? It has nothing to do with ethics and morality. It has to do with religiosity and spirituality. So we're doing this to show that we are listening to God's commandment. And that's different from being moral and ethical, okay? Being moral and ethical makes sense. The philosophers from days of old tell us to be, human beings are ideally moral and ethical human beings. Okay, there's nothing moral and ethical here. It's all about being spiritual. And for some people, that's hard to do, or people refuse to observe laws just because they're spiritual. Okay, so like an atheist could follow laws because they're moral and ethical, but would not, or might even follow the laws of kashrut because it's just a cultural thing to do. My parents, my grandparents, Jews, we just refrain from eating pork, and I'll refrain from eating pork because it's the cultural thing to do. But it's what the Torah is trying to teach, and the rabbis try to teach. It's beyond. We have to go above and beyond that idea. That to be Jewish in a Torah rabbinic way is to follow all the laws of Judaism, not just the moral and ethical ones. Okay, yes, Bob.
The rabbis always went back and tried to go back and forth and
Yeah.
why these things. What? What's the reason for these animals? Was there anything specific?
No, no, there is none. There is none. But we'll see something in a moment below the line on 638. We'll read that commentary shortly, where they come up with some midrash about a couple of the animals here. And what's not included is a midrash about why don't we eat pork? Because the pig, when it's lying down, has its feet in front of it. I don't know. I haven't been on a farm lately to know if that's true or not. But the rabbis say that when a pig is lying down on the ground, its feet are in front of it to show, hey, look at me. I'm kosher because I got my split hooves, right? So they're showing off the split hooves, but you have to look closer to understand that the pig doesn't chew its cud. So the pig is trying to show itself to be kosher, and because it's presenting itself in that way, in a deceptive way, that's why we don't eat pig. Okay, so you'll see the commentary in a moment. After let's look at the bottom of 637 first. So all of it, Bob, to get to your point, is the rabbis had to make it up themselves too, because they're trying to explain to their community what is the reason behind this and these lists, and there is no reason. There is no reason, but the rabbis are trying to provide the reason to get into like a deeper kind of sense. God did have some reason to choose this category because it enables us to understand something about those animals that don't fit into the category. Okay, so below the line on 637, the basis for one major pillar of the Jewish dietary code, the separation of meat and dairy products, is enunciated in Exodus 34:26. That's the verse that says, do not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. Okay, so that's the basis for not eating meat and dairy together. Now the Torah adds a second pillar, the distinction between the living creatures that may be eaten and those that are forbidden. An attentive reading of this chapter clearly shows, now I would say for these pillars, by the way, separating meat and milk, refraining from eating certain animals on this from the list, I would say it's more common for people to refrain from the animals to eat as opposed to refraining from separating meat and milk. I know of a lot of people who will refrain from buying any pork products or eating any pork products, but who will eat a cheeseburger, an all beef cheeseburger. Okay, so there are people, and the end of this comment will point this out. People fulfill these laws in a variety of ways. So, an attentive reading of this chapter, as the commentary continues, clearly shows that the dietary laws are not based on considerations of health, neither in terms of the animals permitted or forbidden, nor out of concern for meat spoiling in the desert heat. Does one need a law that prohibits eating spoiled meat? There is nothing intrinsically impure about pigs or camels, except that the Torah forbids them to Israelites. That's exactly right. There's nothing different about a pig and a camel from a horse, a donkey, a mule, or a cow, or a sheep, or a goat. They're all domesticated to be on a farm, and there's nothing different about them. So, okay. There may be moral or aesthetic considerations for shunning some creatures because of undesirable traits. For example, flesh-eating animals and birds of prey, if we are forbidden to ingest blood, from Leviticus 17. We should avoid the flesh of animals and fowl that ingest blood. So, by the way, I'm not sure what cows are fed on the farm. Like, cows that cows and bulls that are bred for slaughter, as opposed to cows that are dairy cows. Cows and bulls that are bred for slaughter, I'm not sure what they eat. And I'm not sure that those that are destined to the kosher slaughterhouse have to eat anything different than cows and bulls that are destined for the treif slaughterhouse. The slaughterhouses, from what I understand from sessions I've attended through the Rabbinical Assembly about how kosher slaughter works in this country, the kosher slaughterhouses are right next to the main the main slaughterhouses in the Midwest. And the way it works is that an an animal that's going to be going to the kosher slaughterhouse gets slaughtered, and then it's hoisted and goes up on a track and inspected by the kosher inspectors in terms of the internal organs. And if they don't pass muster for kosher, they might still pass muster for the USDA and health and safety of the animal. The track would then go from the kosher slaughterhouse while the animal's hoisted and on this track, and go from the kosher slaughterhouse to the non-kosher slaughterhouse. So the animals are brought there, and there aren't just some animals that are brought for the kosher. All the animals are brought. So all of that to say that I think cows and bulls bred for the slaughter aren't just fed straw and hay. I think they are fed some other kind of pieces of animals that's part of their food. So this statement that the kosher animals that are kosher aren't flesh eating or blood eating, I'm not sure that that's the case today. The overriding purpose of the dietary code is explicit. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy, which is in verse 44 at the end of the chapter, which we won't have time to read today. The dietary laws constitute a way of sanctifying the act of eating. The eating of meat requires killing a living creature, constantly seen by the Torah as compromise. These laws elevate the eating of meat to a level of sanctity by introducing categories of permitted and forbidden. For animals, eating is a matter of instinct. Only human beings can choose on moral or religious grounds not to eat something otherwise available. And that's exactly the point. Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarian. Mormons refrain from caffeine. Muslims are halal. So we're not the only religion to have these categories or food restrictions. The point of the food restrictions is to help to self-identify. What does it mean to be Jewish? An aspect of the definition is we keep kosher. Okay. The dietary laws are given incrementally in the Torah, forbidding boiling a kid in its mother's milk, then prohibiting the ingestion of blood, then declaring certain species of mammal flesh, fish, and fowl unfit for consumption. Similarly, many Jews who begin from a position of limited observance can commit themselves to sanctifying their meal times in an incremental manner. They may begin by avoiding pork and shellfish, continue by separating meat and dairy products, and so on, right? There could be a continuum, especially for people who convert to Judaism and who come from no exposure to Jewish law to then wanting to observe Jewish law. It's kind of hard to do that. I kind of compare it to if you're learning how to swim, you're not going to jump off the high dive for the very first time for contact with water in a swimming pool. You're going to walk in the shallow end down the stairs. So that's the same thing with converting to Judaism. You got to enter it slowly and comfortably, get used to it, and learn how to swim in order to be able to experience and appreciate the deep water. Okay, so the same here by analogy with the laws of kashrut. So if you've never been kosher before and you want to start becoming kosher, well, maybe it might be easier to be vegetarian. And certainly people who convert to Judaism who are vegetarian, it's an easy transition because it's easy to be kosher and vegetarian at the same time. But if one is a carnivore, converting to Judaism, well, it might be harder to wean yourself off of certain meat that you're never going to be eating again. Okay. Also below the line on 638, it says, so it's an interesting comment. Only twice in the Torah are we commanded not to eat pork, yet every Jew knows that it is forbidden. The Torah commands us many more times to refrain from gossip and hurtful speech, yet many observant Jews do not sense that they are violating the Torah when they speak ill of others. So it's a nice Hasidic, Salanter here is the founder of the Musar movement, which is like finding spirituality in how we relate, communicate with our fellow human being. So that's a beautiful comment there, right? Everybody knows we don't eat pork, but well, everybody should know we're not supposed to gossip, but that's harder to refrain from. Okay, there's one more. Let's read some more now about the fish. Verse 9 on 638. Et zeh tochlu mikol asher bamayim, kol asher lo snapir v'kaskeset bamayim bayamim uvenechalim ota tochelu. So again, it's written in the singular. This is what you can eat from everything that is in the water. These are the creatures in the water that you can eat. All that have fins and scales in the water, in water, in the ocean, in the streams, those you can eat. Okay, so lobsters don't have fins and scales, mussels, shrimp, etc. They all live in the water. Salamanders, newts, all of them don't have fins and scales. Now, catfish have fins, but do not have scales. Sharks have fins, do not have scales. So that's why shark and catfish are not kosher. Swordfish is born with fins and scales, but when it's grown and then harvested to eat, they do not have scales. So there's a question about swordfish, whether swordfish is kosher or not. Most in the conservative movement agree that swordfish is kosher. It's how the animal is born. Why it sheds its scales, who knows? So I eat swordfish, but there are Jews who do not eat swordfish. Octopus, squid, all of that. We get the idea. 10. V'chol asher ein lo snapir v'kaskeset bayamim uvanechalim mikol sheretz hamayim umikol nefesh hachaya asher bamayim sheketz heim lahem klachem. So all those that do not have fins and scales in the ocean and in the streams. So I guess salt water and fresh water. From all the creepy crawlies in the water, it says swarming things. So I just say creepy crawlies. From all animals that are, from all land animals that are in the water, like I guess frogs and toads, amphibians, they are considered as an abomination to you. So animals that don't have split hooves and don't chew their cud, they're called tameh. They are impure to you. The sea creatures, water creatures that we can't eat are considered an abomination. So it's just interesting that it uses sheketz as opposed to tameh to describe those water creatures that are forbidden to us. So it could be because water creatures were never considered fit for an offering in the Mishkan and later in the temple. People couldn't bring salmon or trout or sea bass as an offering in the temple. It's just not done. But you can bring a bird, you can bring an animal, a land animal. You can bring an offering of grain, but you cannot bring fish. I don't know why that is. I really don't. But that's why you can go fishing and you can catch your fish that way and gut it and whatever, and that's kosher. Whereas you can't just go hunting for a deer and prepare it and that be considered kosher. So the slaughter process for birds and animals is set for them, and the slaughter process does not apply to fish. 11. V'sheket zihiyu lachem mibsaram lo tochelu ve'et nivlatam teshaketsu. It's an abomination for you. Their flesh you cannot eat, and its carcass is an abomination. Kol asher ein lo snapir v'kaskeset b'mayim sheketzu lachem. And just to repeat, anything that does not have fins and scales in the water, it is an abomination to you. A little bit more about the birds. Ve'et eila teshaktsu min ha'of. Lo ye'achlu shekethem et hanesher ve'et ha'peres ve'et ha'ozniah ve'et ha'da'a ve'et ha'aya lemina et kol orev lemino ve'et bat ha'ya'ana ve'et ha'tachmas ve'et ha'shachaf ve'et ha'netz leminehu ve'et ha'kos ve'et ha'shalach ve'et ha'yanshuf ve'et ha'tinshemet ve'et ha'ka'at ve'et ha'racham ve'et ha'chasida ha'anafa lemina ve'et ha'duchifat ve'et ha'atalef. All those that are abomination from the birds do not eat. They are an abomination, and these are they. Okay, so it's not giving us a category of birds. It's just telling us birds that we cannot eat. Now I have to look to the English translation because I don't know what these birds are. So what the Hebrew means. So it's the eagle, the vulture, and the black vulture, the kite, falcons of every variety, all varieties of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, hawks of every variety, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, and the bustard, the stork, herons of every variety, the hoopoe, and the bat. Now, the hoopoe, by the way, happens to be native to the land of Israel. So that word duchifat is used in Israel today. Yanshuf, I think I knew was an owl, but the other ones, well, nesher, yes, the eagle. Okay, but a couple of the other names of the birds have no idea. Now, it turns out these are all these are all hunting birds. So in other words, the birds that we're allowed to eat are the domesticated birds, fowl. So ducks, geese, chicken, quail. We're allowed to eat quail. Because, you know why we're allowed to eat quail? That's not domesticated. It's because it's one of the birds. Later in the book of Numbers, when the people are hungry, like a wave of quail is brought by God for the people to eat. So if God brought it for the people in the desert to eat, then it has to be kosher. So that's why there's one variety of locust that is permitted to eat also. Yes, there is a variety of locust, and you can buy it in Israel at a certain time. And I can't tell you what the variety of locust is, but yes. So a kind of locust is kosher, and and quail. So there was a question a long time ago. What about turkey? So turkey, it took a number of years until rabbis agreed. Well, yes, turkey should be considered like fowl, even though turkey should be considered like the other birds, like vultures and ravens, because they were in the trees. It's only later that they became domesticated, and now you have turkey farms and such. So it was a discussion among the rabbis a couple hundred years ago as to whether turkey was kosher or not. So there's just one more midrash down below that I want to share. Bottom of 638, the last line there on the bottom right. The forbidden seem to share certain characteristics, including a sharp talon on their feet for hunting and a tendency to prey on living creatures. Hoffman adds that because the translation of some of these names is uncertain, we may eat only fowl that are traditionally eaten in Jewish homes. Okay, so that's turkey, geese, duck. The sages, and then one more, the sages offer homiletic explanations as to why certain birds are considered abominations. Thus, the hawk is ruled out because of its excellent eyesight. It can live in Babylon and see everything that people are doing wrong in the land of Israel. Okay, so that's a kind of a stretch but that's why the rabbis are trying to say, what's wrong with eating a hawk? Okay, the stork is called the pious bird, right? There's the word for it is hasidah. The stork is called the pious bird because it takes such solicitous care of its young, right? That's why, the stork is the traditional way to announce a birth of a child, right? You have a picture of a stork carrying a baby in a sheet. Why then is it listed among the abominations, right? If it's such a caring animal, why should it be an abomination? Because it cares only for its own young and not for anyone else's. Okay, so you see how the rabbis have to kind of stretch here to try to explain when you really shouldn't have to explain. It just is what it is. And this is what God wants us to do and these are the birds, fish, and animals that we're supposed to refrain from. Okay, we'll stop here for today. Bob, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I find it interesting. We may eat only fowl that are traditionally eaten in Jewish homes.
Yes, right.
This is the grandfather clause. If you remember political science and voting, you can vote if your grandfather voted.
Right.
Well, served by my bubby, I can eat it.
Exactly. It's but it's also the wrong way, So we should be eating what God tells us, and then that provides the precedent, as opposed to what was in our home already, and that determines what we should eat. Yes, it's kind of reverse thinking here, but yes, yeah. So anyway, all right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Saul. Go ahead.
Personally, I don't think God did this. I can just see a bunch of rabbis standing around trying to figure out what we should eat. The people that are writing the Torah.
No, I get it.
But I was also, I think you alerted, you said something about it. I was always told that you don't eat animals that eat other animals. You eat animals that just eat like leaves and
right.
And
right. Yes, so that turns out to be the case with animals, that the animals that we're allowed to eat are herbivores. And a buffalo are kosher, deer are kosher, but they also have to be domesticated. So that's just the rule that the rabbis added. You can't hunt for the animal. You have to have them on a farm and be domesticated in order to eat them. So it turns out that the land animals that we are allowed to eat turn out to be herbivores. Yes, but then deriving some lesson from that, again, so we're now applying a reason for these animals that might not have been there. It's not there specifically in the text. So it's us trying to come up with some kind of homiletical, midrashic explanation for something that is just simply because whoever wrote the law, whether God wrote the law or the editors of the Torah wrote the law, this just became Israelite Jewish identity. This is just the way it is. So that's the simplest and really the most honest explanation that we can give for this list of animals, fish, and birds. All right. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.